The old barn at the far edge of Pine Hollow had been feared for 15 long years. It stood alone beyond the fields where grass grew thin and dry. Its wooden walls were dark from age and rain. The roof leaned like it was tired of holding itself up. No birds landed there and no animals grazed nearby. People said the barn did not belong to the present anymore. They said it belonged to something unfinished. Long ago the barn had been full of life. Horses slept inside and children played near its doors. Laughter once echoed across the land during harvest seasons. Then one summer everything changed. A prized horse disappeared in the night. The family who owned the barn left without explanation. By morning the house was empty and the barn was locked tight. From that day on no one touched it again. Stories grew as years passed. Some said the horse never left the barn. Some said a terrible mistake had been hidden inside. Others claimed they heard sounds after midnight when the land was quiet. The truth was never spoken clearly. Fear filled the space where answers should have been. Luke came back to Pine Hollow after many years away. He was a calm cowboy with steady hands and thoughtful eyes. He did not talk much and did not judge quickly. Life had taught him patience through long days and hard nights. He bought a small piece of land once owned by his uncle. The work was honest and the land still had promise. Luke felt at peace there despite the whispers. On his first week back people warned him about the barn. An old man at the feed store told him to stay clear of it. A woman at the diner crossed herself when it was mentioned. They spoke like the barn could hear them. Luke listened without arguing or laughing. He believed fear always came from somewhere real. Each morning Luke rode out to check fences and water lines. His path often brought him close to the tree line. From there the barn could be seen standing alone. Luke never felt watched, but he felt a weight in his chest. It was not fear but curiosity mixed with concern. Something about the place felt unfinished. One evening the sky turned orange as the sun sank low. Luke was riding home after a long day of work. The land was quiet except for insects in the grass. Suddenly his horse slowed and then stopped. Its ears stood straight and its body tensed. Luke followed its gaze toward the old barn. At first Luke heard nothing. Then a sound carried softly through the air. It was low and strained and full of pain. Luke knew horses well and recognized the cry. It was not a call of greeting or hunger. It was a sound of fear and suffering. The cry came again and Luke felt his chest tighten. No horse should sound like that. Not in open land and not after so many years. Luke slid off his horse and tied it to a fence post. He listened again to be sure. The sound was real and it came from the barn. Every warning he had heard rushed through his mind. 15 years of silence and secrets pressed against him. Still Luke could not walk away. A cowboy does not ignore a suffering animal. He stepped forward slowly toward the barn. The closer he came the colder the air felt. The grass thinned until only dirt lay beneath his boots. The barn rose before him like a tired giant. Its door hung crooked and cracked with age. Another cry came from inside louder than before. Luke placed his hand on the door. The wood felt rough and cold under his palm. For a moment he hesitated and took a deep breath. Then he pushed the door open just enough to look inside. The smell hit him first heavy and stale. Dust floated through the narrow beams of light. Inside the barn shadows clung to every corner. Luke stepped inside and let the door creak behind him. His eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness. Then he saw movement near the back wall. A thin horse stood there trembling. Its coat was dull and its ribs showed clearly. Old chains lay broken near its legs. Its eyes were wide and filled with fear. Luke felt shock and anger rise together. This horse had been trapped here for years. It had survived on scraps and rainwater alone. Someone had hidden it and walked away. The barn had not been cursed. It had been used to hide cruelty and guilt. Luke moved slowly so the horse would not panic. He spoke softly while stepping closer. The horse cried again but did not try to flee. It was tired of running and tired of waiting. Luke reached out and placed his hand gently on its neck. The horse flinched, then leaned into the touch. Luke swallowed hard as he understood the truth. This was the missing horse from 15 years ago. The secret of the barn had been alive all this time. Outside, the wind brushed against the walls. Inside, Luke made a quiet promise. The barn would no longer hide the past. The truth would finally come into the light. Luke stayed still for a long moment as the thin horse leaned against him. He let his breathing slow so the animal could feel calm. The barn creaked softly as the wind passed outside. Dust floated through the dim light like quiet witnesses. Luke knew rushing would only bring fear. Patience was the only way forward. The horse trembled under his hand but did not pull away. Its body was weak, yet its spirit still fought to survive. Luke spoke gently, using the same tone he used with frightened colts. The horse lowered its head slightly as if listening. Years of loneliness sat heavy in its eyes. Luke felt anger grow but kept it buried. He looked around the barn more carefully. Old buckets lay overturned near the wall. A cracked trough held dried mud at the bottom. Broken chains lay half buried in dirt and straw. This place had been a prison, not a shelter. Luke realized the horse had been left here on purpose. Luke slowly removed his jacket and draped it over the horse's back. The animal startled, then relaxed when the warmth settled in. Luke whispered that help had finally come. He promised the horse would not be alone again. Outside, the sky darkened as evening moved toward night. Luke knew he could not leave the horse here another hour. He stepped carefully toward the barn door. Each movement was slow and calm. The horse watched him closely, afraid of being abandoned again. Luke returned with a rope from his saddle. He tied it loosely so the horse could follow without fear. The walk out of the barn was slow and careful. The horse hesitated at the doorway. Light touched its face for the first time in years. It blinked and snorted softly, unsure of the world beyond the walls. Luke waited without pulling or pushing. After a long pause, the horse stepped forward. Cool air wrapped around them as they left the barn. The horse lifted its head and breathed deeply. Luke felt a quiet victory in that simple moment. He guided the horse toward his land step by step. The night sounds of the valley surrounded them. Back at Luke's corral, he led the horse inside gently. Fresh water waited, and the horse drank slowly. Luke brought soft feed and let the animal eat at its own pace. He watched carefully, making sure not to overwhelm it. Trust would take time, and Luke understood that. As the horse rested, Luke sat on the fence nearby. His thoughts raced with questions and answers. Someone had hidden this horse 15 years ago. Someone had chosen silence over responsibility. The town had accepted fear instead of truth. Luke knew the secret could not stay buried anymore. The horse deserved justice and care. The people of Pine Hollow deserved the truth. Luke decided he would speak to the town in the morning. The barn would no longer hold its power. Morning came slowly and softly. The horse slept through the night without panic. Luke checked on it, often offering water and gentle words. By sunrise, the horse stood steadier than before. Its eyes followed Luke with quiet trust. Luke rode into town just after breakfast. The streets were calm and familiar. He stopped first at the feed store. Old Ben looked up and froze when Luke spoke. Luke told him the horse was alive. Word spread faster than Luke expected. People gathered near the store, whispering loudly. Faces showed shock and disbelief. Some showed guilt while others showed fear. Luke did not raise his voice. He simply told them what he had seen. Mary from the diner pressed a hand to her mouth. She said she always felt something was wrong. Others nodded slowly as memories returned. The missing family and the locked barn came back into focus. Luke said the barn was never cursed. He said fear had been easier than truth. He said an animal had suffered while everyone looked away. Silence filled the space after his words. A man stepped forward with shaking hands. His name was Paul and his voice was low. He admitted his family once owned the barn. He said fear and shame made them leave. He said they thought the horse would not survive long. The truth landed hard on everyone listening. Years of fear suddenly felt hollow. The barn had not been a mystery. It had been a reminder of a mistake. Luke did not accuse or shout. He said what mattered now was making things right. The horse needed care and time. The barn needed to be opened to light. The town needed to face what it avoided. People slowly nodded in agreement. Some offered help and supplies. Others offered apologies they never thought they would give. Luke accepted help for the horse but nothing else. By the time Luke returned home, the valley felt different. The barn no longer felt heavy in the distance. It felt like a place ready to be changed. The horse lifted its head when Luke arrived. Hope settled quietly between them. The days that followed brought quiet changes across Pine Hollow. People no longer avoided the road near the old barn. Some stopped at a distance and simply looked. Others walked closer as if trying to understand the past. Fear slowly loosened its grip on the land. Luke focused most of his time on the horse. He named him River because life still flowed inside him. River moved slowly but showed strength each new morning. Luke brushed his coat gently and cleaned old wounds with care. The horse flinched less with every passing day. Trust grew in small steady steps. River began to eat without watching the fence. He lifted his head when Luke entered the corral. His eyes no longer held only fear. They now held questions and hope. The barn became a place of discussion and memory. People gathered near it during the afternoons. Some spoke about the family who once lived there. Others shared regrets about never asking questions. The silence that ruled for years finally broke. Paul returned one evening with supplies and tools. He did not look toward the barn at first. Guilt weighed heavily on his shoulders. Luke met him without anger or blame. They stood quietly before speaking. Paul said he wanted to help repair the damage. He said he could not change the past. He said he could face it now. Luke listened and nodded slowly. Healing required action, not words. Together they opened the barn doors wide. Sunlight poured inside for the first time in years. Dust lifted and danced in the bright air. The darkness retreated into corners. The barn felt smaller and less powerful. They cleared broken chains and rotted boards. They removed old fear piece by piece. Neighbors joined slowly, bringing tools and hands. The work became shared and honest. The barn changed with every hour. River watched from a distance. He lifted his head and listened to voices. The sound of work did not scare him. It seemed to reassure him. Life was returning to places once forgotten. Luke noticed River walking more confidently. His steps grew steadier each day. The horse followed Luke along the fence line. He even tested a gentle trot one afternoon. Luke smiled quietly at the progress. The town changed as well. People spoke more openly with one another. Old stories surfaced without fear. Truth replaced rumors and guesses. The weight of silence lifted slowly. One evening children gathered near Luke's land. They watched River from behind the fence. Their eyes were wide with curiosity, not fear. Luke explained softly how kindness builds trust. River stood calmly, as if listening. Parents watched nearby with thoughtful expressions. They realized fear had been taught, not learned. The barn had become a lesson for everyone. Avoidance had caused more harm than truth. Paul returned often to help with River's care. He worked quietly and never rushed. River kept his distance at first. Over time the horse allowed him closer. Forgiveness arrived slowly but surely. Storm clouds rolled through one night. Thunder echoed across the valley. Luke checked on River through the rain. The horse trembled but did not panic. Luke stayed beside him until the storm passed. That night Luke reflected on the past 15 years. He thought of how easily fear can grow. He thought of how silence feeds it. The barn had held pain, not mystery. The horse had held strength, not weakness. By morning the storm cleared the air. River stood brighter and more alert. Luke led him gently into the open field. Grass brushed against River's legs. He breathed deeply and lifted his head. River took cautious steps forward. Then he moved freely across the field. The movement was not fast, but it was real. Luke watched with quiet pride. Freedom was returning inch by inch. The town gathered one afternoon to see River. People stood along the fence line respectfully. Some wiped tears without shame. They saw what had been hidden for years. They saw what truth could restore. Luke spoke only a few words. He said fear grows in silence. He said truth needs courage. He said kindness heals what time cannot. No one argued with him. As the sun lowered behind the hills, River stood tall. The barn behind him no longer felt threatening. It felt like a place reclaimed. Luke knew the story was not finished yet. But the hardest part was already faced. The final weeks of summer brought a calm that Pine Hollow had not felt in many years. The land seemed lighter, as if it could finally breathe. The barn stood open now with strong doors and fresh wood. Sunlight moved freely through its wide space. What once held fear now held work and honesty. Luke continued caring for River every single day. The horse's strength returned little by little. His coat gained shine and his steps grew sure. He no longer startled at small sounds. He trusted the land and the people around him. Each morning Luke walked River through the fields. They moved slowly, letting muscles rebuild naturally. River learned the feel of open space again. The wind brushed through his mane as he walked. Luke stayed close but did not rush him. The town began to change in quiet ways. People greeted each other more warmly. They spoke openly instead of whispering. The barn became a place of shared effort. It reminded everyone of what truth could do. Children often came to help after school. They brushed River gently under Luke's guidance. They learned patience and kindness from simple actions. River stood calmly as small hands worked carefully. Trust passed between them without words. One afternoon a gathering was held near the barn. People brought food and chairs from their homes. It was not a celebration but a moment of closure. They wanted to acknowledge the past together. They wanted to move forward honestly. Paul stood beside Luke during the gathering. His voice shook but he spoke clearly. He admitted his family's mistake without excuses. He asked forgiveness from the town and from the horse. Silence followed, then quiet acceptance. Luke said forgiveness does not erase the past. He said it allows the future to grow. People nodded slowly, understanding his words. The barn no longer belonged to fear. It belonged to learning and responsibility. As the days passed, River showed a desire to run. Luke noticed the energy in his movements. One clear morning Luke led River to the open field. The grass stretched wide under a blue sky. Luke removed the lead and stepped back. River stood still for a long moment. He looked around as if measuring the space. Then he moved forward at a slow trot. Each step grew stronger and more confident. Luke watched without moving. Suddenly River broke into a full run. His hooves struck the ground with freedom. His body moved smoothly without fear. The sound echoed across the valley. People watching held their breath. River ran in wide circles, lifting his head high. The past seemed to fall away with every stride. Luke felt his chest tighten with pride and relief. This was the life River deserved. This was the ending the story needed. When River finally slowed, he returned to Luke calmly. Luke placed a hand on his neck. The horse leaned into the touch peacefully. Trust and freedom met in that moment. Nothing more needed to be said. The barn stood quietly in the background. It no longer felt heavy or dark. It felt like part of the land again. A reminder that truth brings healing. A reminder that courage changes everything. As autumn approached, Pine Hollow prepared for new seasons. The barn would serve animals again. The fields would hold life and movement. River would remain with Luke always. The secret of 15 years was finally laid to rest. Luke looked across the land one evening as the sun set. He felt peace where curiosity once lived. The fear that once ruled the valley was gone. In its place stood honesty and care. The barn no longer held a secret.